Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the 12th meeting in 2013 of the Rural Affairs, Climate Change and Environment Committee. Members and the public should turn off their mobile phones and Blackberries or other equipment, as leaving them in flight mode or on silent will affect the broadcasting system. Agenda item 1 is subordinate legislation. First item today is consideration of a negative instrument as listed on the agenda, and members should note that no motion to annul has been received in relation to this instrument. I refer members to the paper and ask whether the committee has agreed that it does not wish to make any recommendations in relation to this instrument. We are agreed. Thank you very much. Agenda item 2 is Aquaculture-and-Fisheries-Bill, second day of stage 2 consideration of the bill, and I welcome Paul Wheelhouse, Minister for Environment and Climate Change. Good morning, Minister.
Morning.
And the member who's the member in charge of the bill. I also welcome his officials, who he can introduce to us just now, because I think they very nearly outnumber us.
Come well armed today, Convener. I have Alistair Mitchell, who's Head of Aquaculture Policy, who is to my right. I have Carol Barker-Munro, who at the moment is over to my right as well, who is Head of Salmon and Recreational Fisheries Policy. Ewan Milligan, who's Head of Enforcement Operations. David McLeish, who's Office of the Scottish Parliamentary Council. Lindsay Anderson to my left, who's Scottish Government Legal Department. Norman McLeod hasn't made it. Jeff Gibbons, who's the bill team leader as well, who's on the list.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Minister. Dealing with fish farms, enforcement notices and revocation of licences, I call Amendment 53 in the name of Jane Baxter, grouped with Amendment 54. Jane Baxter to move the Amendment 53 and speak to both amendments in the group.
Thanks, Convener. Morning. The Association of Salmon Fishery Boards and other wild fisheries organisations have been informed by the Fish Health Inspectorate that the enforcement provisions of the 2007 Act do not extend to the health and welfare of wild fish. In the Stage 1 report, the committee requested clarification that the provisions in the 2007 Act extend to enable action regarding lice outbreaks in wild fish. The Minister has subsequently provided that clarification, that the provisions in the 2007 Act only relate to parasites in fish farms and shellfish farms. The Fish Health Inspectorate should be able to utilise their powers where there is evidence that a fish farm is failing to contain lice at safe levels for local salmonid populations. For example, where there is evidence of a lice epizootic amongst nearby populations of wild fish coinciding with high levels of sea lice on the farmed fish. And in its consultation on the Aquaculture and Fisheries Bill, the Scottish Government asked the following questions. 1. Do you agree that Scottish ministers should have powers to require SEPA to reduce a biomass consent where it appears to them necessary and appropriate, for example, to address concerns about fish health and welfare? And 2. Do you agree that Scottish ministers should be given powers, ultimately, to revoke or to require or request others to revoke consents? Following significant support for both these proposals, Marine Scotland responded that SEPA can already reduce biomass consent in certain circumstances, and that it would consider further non-legislative solutions and had begun discussions with SEPA about these matters. On the issue of revocation of licences, the response was simply, we do not intend to progress these proposals at this time. The committee has heard clear evidence of the relationship between biomass and sea lice infestation pressure on wild fish. It is therefore vital, given that SEPA considers the effects of sea lice at ultra vires, that the committee are absolutely clear that Scottish ministers have a power to vary a licence issued by SEPA. With regard to revocation of licences, there is significant concern amongst a range of stakeholders that this is not currently possible. Given that Marine Scotland Science are unable to give definitive predictions as to the effect of a site in a particular location, and taking into account that most developments receive permanent planning consent, such a power is potentially important as our understanding of the interactions between aquaculture and wild salmonids improves. I move the amendments.
Thank you. No other members indicated they wish to speak, so Minister, would you care to respond?
Thank you, Convener. I am speaking to Jane Baxter's amendments 53 and 54. Amendment 53 would extend and expand the criteria in which an enforcement notice could be served through the Aquaculture and Fisheries Scotland Act 2007 to encompass circumstances relating to the protection of wild salmonids and the containment of parasites. While I believe the protection of wild fish is important, indeed many of the provisions in the draft bill will help to enhance the protection of wild fish, as well as building on current best practice. that exist for fish farm health management, I do not believe this amendment will be effective. Existing provisions in the Aquaculture and Fisheries Scotland Act 2007 currently provide the ability to assess measures in place on a farm to control sea lice. The source and spread of such parasites, which are naturally occurring in the wild, are by extension out with the control of the farmer. Legislation that seeks to control the source and spread will therefore be unworkable. In addition, this amendment does not address the issue of inspection powers which might be needed to complement this power. Amendment 54 would provide, in statute, the ability for Scottish ministers to direct SEPA to revoke the Controlled Activity Regulation licence or to reduce the biomass of fish allowed to be farmed at a particular site should there be problems that cannot be dealt with by other enforcement measures. We have previously said that ministers can already direct SEPA to reduce biomass under certain conditions that go beyond the powers that it has traditionally used to reduce biomass in relation to managing discharges to the marine environment. I have put my intention on record to progress this issue through non-legislative means. So while I am in agreement with the principle of this amendment, I believe that it is unnecessary. I will therefore be opposing Amendments 53 and 54 and ask the committee to do the same.
Jane Baxter to wind up and press or withdraw.
Thank you very much, Minister, for those comments. It's disappointing, but I'm interested in your comments that you're keen to progress it through non-legislative measures, but in any case I'd like to press the amendments. Yeah, press the amendments.
Press the amendment, okay. In that case, the question is that Amendment 53 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. There were dissent from Amendment 53. So we'll go to a vote. Those in favour of the amendment, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4. Those against the amendment, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The amendment had 4 for, 5 against, therefore it was not agreed. We call Amendment 54 in the name of Jane Baxter, already debated with Amendment 53. Jane Baxter to move or not move?
Move.
Moved. Amendment 54 has been moved. Are we all agreed? Yes. No, we're not. Can we have a move to a vote? Those in favour of Amendment 54, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4. Those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The amendment is not agreed by 4 votes for, 5 votes against. We move to technical requirements for equipment used in fish farming and call Amendment 70 in the name of Tavish Scott. Group with Amendments 71, 72, 55, 73, 74, 75, 56, 76 and 18. Tavish Scott to move Amendment 70 and speak to all the amendments in the group.
Thank you very much, Convener. Let me start by accepting that the government has set out a target of growing the industry or growing production in the fish farming industry by 50% by 2020, which is by any standards an exacting standard, exacting number. It's the number that Claudia Beamish pointed out in the committee when we discussed this amendments last week. Now, in my estimation, that if the government is going to hit their target, never mind ask the industry to hit it, then at the very least the government have got to accept that the framework that this bill provides has to allow them to do that. And what I'm seeking to do in 70 and the related amendments from there on is to ensure that once again, as the points I made last week, once again, the government doesn't try to micromanage the industry. There is a sensible working group involving the industry and government who operate under the auspices of the ministerial group on aquaculture, chaired by the Minister. Now that working group defines a set of standards for use across the industry. That means that those standards are agreed and they can therefore be introduced across the industry and monitored as such. And it seems to me, and it's seemed to the government up until now, that was a sensible way forward, a sensible way to achieve both the higher environmental standards, the higher industry standards that government and industry are looking for, but also the higher environmental standards as well, which is of interest, I appreciate, to members across the committee and of course to other stakeholders who have a great interest in this industry. What I don't think is sensible is to draft the bill in the way in which the government have, to set out and to use the word requirements, because that will mean two things. Firstly, it will stifle improvement and innovation, because if the word requirement is set out in that way, every time a change is necessary, there may have to be, and it's not clear from the explanatory memorandum or any other regulations that have been brought before Parliament in respect of this bill, there may have to be a subsequent action in order to use that word requirement. Whereas if it's standards, as I suggest in my amendments, then the purpose of the working group is to achieve those standards. And that seems to me an eminently sensible way forward, which has worked in the past. I can't see what the requirement is to change it. And furthermore, every technical change, if the government's minded to force through its use of the word requirements, every technical change in fish husbandry terms would have to again be approved by Marine Scotland. There once again would be that enormous interest in the ministerial decision making, and I am, as I made clear last week, pretty concerned about the potential for that ministerial decision making to be scrutinised on a very, very regular basis by parliamentarians for whatever side they are in terms of this industry. So I'm again trying to save the Minister from unintended consequences of his bill, and therefore I suggest that the use of the word standards is going to be an appropriate word to use in the context of a bill which is seeking to achieve the government and the industry's targets in relation to production. I also recognise the merit in Jim Hume's wording on training. It would seem to me that it would be eminently sensible, as the industry does, to achieve the standards again that that particular amendment is working to. And in that respect, Convener, I'd be more than happy to move 70 and the related amendments.
Thank you very much. Jim Hume to speak to Amendment 55.
I'll speak to Amendment 55 and 56, conveners, and thank you if that's okay. In our evidence sessions and through much of the correspondence we all received, I think it was evident that escaped farm fish were of concern. That can often be due to equipment failure or perhaps predator attacks, but I think the improved containment working group in their work recognised that in 2010, 29.5% of escapes were due to human error, and it's fair to say our committee also recognised this. My two amendments will allow training to become part of the technical standard in line with the original Aquaculture Technical Research Forum. So therefore, I hope fellow members recognise the usefulness of these two amendments, which I now move in my name.
Thank you. I now call the Minister to speak to Amendment 18.
If you wouldn't mind, Convener, I'll speak to all the amendments and
the other amendments, yes.
Convener, the provisions within this bill introducing technical requirements for equipment used in Scottish fish farms have been developed and informed by a containment subgroup of the Ministerial Group of Aquaculture, as referred to by Tavish Scott. This expert group comprises finfish farmers and trade associations, fish farm equipment suppliers and manufacturers, i.e. nets, pens and moorings, insurers and regulators. They have not been developed in isolation and reflect a general desire to see common standards across the industry and to ensure that they are appropriate and proportionate. The provision is for an enabling power, permitting the detail to be laid out in subordinate legislation, given the requirements to be prescribed under the regulations are likely to change as a result of technological advances and the evolution of best practice within the industry. And just to pick up on Tavish Scott's point about the growth industry, I recognise the 50% figure, but however, just alert the committee to the fact that based on a 2011 baseline, it's a 32% increase that we're looking to achieve by the target. A regulation-making power enables ministers to respond to the issues more readily and flexibly than if the relevant standards were to be prescribed in primary legislation. With that background in mind, I wasn't clear before appearing today, but I am now slightly more clear as to why Tavish Scott is moving these amendments and trying to seek to replace requirements with standards. However, the regulations will set out the requirements to be met in respect of the equipment. Those requirements will set minimum design, etc. standards to be met in terms of the equipment, but may also create obligations as to the maintenance and installation of that equipment, for example, that would not really be referred to in as standards as such. Also, the requirements mentioned in section 3.3d to F of the bill relate to provision of information, the giving of access, cooperation, keeping records and notifying failures in equipment. Those requirements aren't really standards, and so it would be wrong to label them as such, as Amendments 73 to 75 seek to do. The requirements are therefore about setting standards, but are also about wider requirements. I do not consider, therefore, that these amendments enhance the provision in any way, and in fact they could restrict the power. Therefore, I would ask the committee to reject Amendments 70 to 76. I do, however, recognise the reasoning behind amendments from Jim Hume, which seek to ensure regulations made under the powers set out in Section 3 of the Bill will require that fish farm operators and their staff are appropriately trained to use fish farm equipment, adhering to the new technical standards. Such training would seek to militate against escapes due to human error, and I recognise that. I'm well aware this is an important issue and one that was raised a number of times during Stage 1. Indeed, the committee concluded in Stage 1 report that training is best handled by the fish farming industry, and that we should look at how best to consider progress in the delivery of good practice in that regard via the Ministerial Group on Aquaculture, or as it will now be known, Ministerial Group for Sustainable Aquaculture, and the advice of its Containment Working Group. Training is an important aspect of the work to develop technical standards, as well as a requirement for equipment to meet technical specifications. Work will also cover operational procedures, codes of practice, operators' manuals, and the training of operatives to ensure equipment is used appropriately and that procedures are followed correctly. As I indicated earlier, we are already working with industry to ensure staff are appropriately trained, building on the best practice workshops and in-house schemes that industry have already introduced. I've also asked the MGSA, as it will now be known, Containment Group, to consider the issue of training to prevent escapes due to human error. Amendment 56, which seeks to include a requirement for fish farmers to retain training records, seems entirely sensible to me and will have the desired effect of allowing inspectors to check that staff have been appropriately trained. However, given that these two amendments are interrelated, I would not wish to consider either in isolation at Stage 2 or in haste, on the basis that we will come back at Stage 3 with further thoughts. Amendment 18, the Government Amendment, is in direct response to concerns raised by the Subordinate Legislation Committee at Stage 1 and wider policy consideration. The committee was concerned that the provision as drafted enables Scottish ministers to delegate to third parties the power to prescribe in regulations a technical requirement for fish farming equipment. This was not the intention, and we therefore seek to make it clear that the requirements are set only in the regulations by the Scottish ministers. And I invite the committee to resist Amendments 70 to 76. I would invite Jim Hume, MSP, not to move Amendments 55 to 56 on the basis that we will come back at Stage 3 with further thoughts. And I also invite the committee to accept Amendment 18.
Thank you. I have a request from Alec Ferguson to speak on this section.
Thank you, Convener. I just wanted to seek a little clarification from Tavish Scott, if I may, because I'm tempted to support his amendments, but I was struggling with how I could possibly put this. And if I could liken the whole business of equipment used in fish farming to a car, I would suggest that his first two amendments would refer to the overall car at the end of a process. And it seems to me that there is some legitimacy for standards to be imposed on the overall makeup of a car. When it comes to the further amendments, it seems to me that they would refer to bits of the car, the engine, the wheels, the whatever it might be, where there is slightly less relevance for standards as opposed to requirements. And I just wondered if he would care to comment on that in summing up to satisfy me that the standards are relevant the whole way through this, rather than just at the start of it.
Nigel Don.
Thank you very much, Convener. I think it's a very interesting question from Alex Ferguson, and I'm sure Tavish Scott will want to consider it. But it does seem to me that we are actually arguing about words, which is something we sometimes have to do. I take the Minister's point that in the context, requirements does appear to be a rather wider word than standards, and I think that's the reason why the draftsmen are telling us that that's the word that should be here. And on that basis, it does seem to me that the Minister has got a fair point and one that we would want to support. I'd also just like to comment on Amendment 18 and note the Subordinate Legislations Committee's concerns about the delegation of powers, and I'm grateful to the Minister for withdrawing that, because I think that's quite simply the right thing to do in the context of delegated powers.
Thank you. Tavish Scott, to wind up and press or withdraw.
Thank you very much. Convener, can I just take those points in reverse, or not quite in reverse? Firstly, to deal with Mr. Ferguson's car analogy, at least it wasn't a tractor he used there. We could have had a long debate on that. The simple answer to that is the working group, in that there is an industry government working group. It involves, as the Minister said in his introduction, it involves stakeholders across the industry and from outside the industry, as well as technical experts from within government and Marine Scotland. And therefore, they, in my humble estimation, should be able, more than able, to deal not just with the body, but also with the contents of the body as well, depending on which analogy we wish to follow on. Two other points, if I may, on the Minister's response. Firstly, his answer on the detail is that we're going to get yet more legislation and yet more opportunities in Parliament. Well, with the greatest respect, subordinate legislation tends to get nodded through this place. I've been in here a long time, as some of us have, and I don't remember too many bits of subordinate legislation that ever came under any kind of sustained scrutiny, and that's a failure of Parliament, in my view, not a failure of a government proposing the subordinate legislation. But what it does mean is that the idea that that will lead to a day-by-day, real hard assessment of another change to a requirement, I think is cloud cuckoo land, and it gives government a carte blanche. And the Minister said it. He used the phrase restrict the power. He doesn't want me, I don't think it means me personally, but he doesn't want this amendment to restrict the power, and by the power I mean the power of the government. Well, I do want to restrict the power of government. I think they're taking far too much power here. And I think I don't think the government can have it both ways. They either want this industry to grow. I take the Minister's point, it's 32% increase in production on a 2011 baseline, but we can play around with figures. But irrespective of the figure, if you want this industry to grow and if you want this industry to develop, you can't keep taking more powers to restrict it and to micromanage it. And that is what is going on here. And therefore, Nigel Don's point on wording, he prefers the wording because, as Nigel Don very fairly put it, this is a rather wider wording. Nigel's quite right. Nigel Don is quite right about that. The government want a wider wording because that gives them more latitude in what they want to do, more ability to control this industry. And I think government have to say what they want to do and then explain what they want to do. And in no ministerial explanation I have heard, not just today, but all the way through the passage of this bill or in the introduction of this bill in Parliament, have they made it absolutely clear that they want to impose a set of greater regulations on the industry and therefore restrict its ability to make changes to its operational practices. What we are heading for here is operational involvement by government, by Marine Scotland, in the day-to-day commercial activities of an industry. Now, if that's what the government want, I just think they should say so, and I am going to press these amendments.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. So the question is that Amendment 70 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are not agreed. There will be a division. All members in favour of the amendment, please raise their hands. 1, 2. Those against the amendment, raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There were 2 in favour and 7 against, therefore the amendment was not agreed. I call Amendment 71 in the name of Tavish Scott, already debated with Amendment 70. Tavish Scott to move or not move?
Move, Convener.
Thank you. There's been a division. There's been a decision to be made now. The question is that Amendment 71 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. We are not agreed. Can those who are in favour of the amendment please show? 1, 2. Those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We're 2 favour, 7 against. Therefore, the amendment was disagreed. I call Amendment 72 in the name of Tavish Scott, already debated with Amendment 70. Tavish Scott to move or not move?
Move, Convener.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 72 be agreed. Are we all agreed?
No.
We are not agreed. There will be a division. Those in favour, please show. 1, 2. Those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There were 2 in favour, 7 against, and therefore that Amendment 72 was not agreed to. I call Amendment 55 in the name of Jim Hume, already debated with Amendment 70. Jim Hume to move or not move?
Just to say, I appreciate what the Minister said, and I do trust him, but in the spirit of democracy, I move these.
Okay. The question is that Amendment 55 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are not agreed. There will be a division. All members in favour of the amendment, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4. Those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There were 4 for, 5 against, no abstentions. Amendment 55 is not agreed. Call Amendment 73 in the name of Tavish Scott, already debated with Amendment 70. Tavish Scott to move or not move.
Move, Convener.
Thank you. The question is that 73 be agreed. Are we all agreed? No. We are not agreed. Those in favour of the amendment, please show. 1, 2. Those against, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 2 for, 7 against. The amendment 73 is not agreed. Call Amendment 74 in the name of Tavish Scott, already debated with Amendment 70. Tavish Scott to move or not move.
Move, Convener.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 74 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. We are not agreed. There will be a division. Those in favour, please show. 2. Those against, please show. 7. There are 2 for, 7 against. Therefore, Amendment 74 was not agreed to. Amendment 75, the name of Tavish Scott, already debated with Amendment 70. Tavish Scott to move or not move?
Move, Convener.
The question is that Amendment 75 be agreed. Are we all agreed? No. Yes. We are not agreed. There will be a division. All members in favour of the amendment, please raise their hands. 1, 2. Those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 2 for, 7 against. Therefore, the amendment was not agreed to. Call Amendment 56, the name of Jim Hume, already debated with Amendment 70. Jim Hume to move or not move?
Moved, Convener.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 56 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. There is a division because we are not agreed. Those in favour, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4. Those against, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There were 4 for, 5 against. Therefore, the Amendment 56 is not agreed. I call Amendment 76, the name of Tavish Scott, already debated with Amendment 70. Tavish Scott to move or not move?
Move, Convener.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 76 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. We are not agreed. There will be a division. All members in favour of the amendment, please raise your hands. 1, 2. Those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There were 2 for, 7 against. Therefore, Amendment 76 is not agreed. Call Amendment 18 in the name of the Minister, already debated with Amendment 70. Minister to move formally. Thank you. The question is that Amendment 18 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Amendment 18 is correct. Is agreed. The question is that Section 3 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Thank you. We move to Section 4 on wellboats, definition and enforcement notices. And we call Amendment 77 in the name of Tavish Scott, grouped with Amendments 19, 20 and 58. I point out that if the Amendment 77 is agreed to, I can't call Amendment 19 due to preemption. Tavish Scott to move Amendment 77, speak to all the amendments in the group.
Thank you, Convener. The purpose of 77 is to recognise that in the drafting of the bill as it currently stands, the term wellboat is not adequately defined because it simply embraces many more vessels, many more boats than are used for the purposes of a wellboat. I can assure the Minister he may have had this in Eyebrows, but I certainly got this in the pier in Lerwick over the weekend because the discussion on this has been taken forward by boat owners and by the industry with other users of the sea, particularly around the fishing industry and others. And I hope the government do recognise they've basically got the definition wrong. And all I was seeking to do in this was the best illustration or the best example I could come up with was to use the documentation that obviously vessels have in respect of registration and insurance as a basis of definition. I don't suggest it's perfect. I don't actually know what is perfect, but it seems to me a way of tightening up tightening up a clause at the moment, which I'm sure the Minister doesn't mean to instill on boats which are simply not used for that particular purpose. In respect to 58, Convener, I simply want to ensure that where the government lay a charge or recover expenses, it is right that those should be detailed to those who are on the end of those charges or expenses. I don't think any of us pay our lawyers' fees or our accountants' fees without asking them for a breakdown, and we dispute that. And if it's the lawyer, one could take him to the clerk of the sheriff court, and we probably all had occasion to do that. So it seems to me a good point of governance that in respect of government activity in this area, they too should have to detail charges, and that's simply what 58 seeks to achieve. Convener.
Thank you. I call the Minister to speak to Amendment 19 and other amendments in the group.
Thank you, Convener. These amendments are seeking to do the same thing but from different angles. I do understand the industry's concerns about the definition of a wellboat, which Tavish Scott has expressed so well on their behalf. Section 4 of the bill defines the meaning of wellboat for the purposes of Section 5 of the bill, in which ministers take powers to regulate control and monitoring of operations of wellboats in Scotland. There is at present no statutory definition of a wellboat. The bill as introduced contains a definition which, it could be argued, might include every vessel used in fish farming, including static feed barges and other workboats, which is clearly not our intention. Convener, Tavish Scott's Amendment 77, however, lacks specification. In essence, it would mean that a vessel is a wellboat if the registration document says it's a wellboat, and if the registration document says it's a cargo boat, then the regulations cannot apply, even when the vessel is carrying out the functions of a wellboat. We have taken a different approach and defined the purposes for which a wellboat could be used. We aim to take a risk-based approach to regulation, specifying standards for the tasks and functions which pose the greatest risk to fish health and welfare as well as the environment. My amendments therefore clarify the policy intention not to include workboats and feed barges used in the industry and add the function of grading fish, as fish farmers and wellboat operators have told us that this is a common use. Amendment 58 would require a statement of expenses to be provided when Scottish ministers seek to recover incurred expenses relating to enforcement of wellboat regulations. I think that provision of such a statement is already implicit in giving effect to the bill as drafted, but I will consider it further and, if necessary, bring forward an amendment at stage 3. For these reasons, I would ask Tavish Scott to withdraw Amendments 77 and 58 and ask the committee to accept Amendments 19 and 20.
Tavish Scott to move his amendment, if he wishes, wind up and press or withdraw.
Well, thank you, Convener. I'm certainly happy to withdraw 58 on the basis of the ministerial assurance on that point. I think that's fair enough, and on the basis of the undertaking that he's given to make it explicit, I think it should be explicit. But I very much take his point on that. On 77, I would like to see I'd like to press that because I'd like to see the consultation that the minister has had with the industry that demonstrates that what he is proposing meets the objective that I suspect we share in terms of not including vessels that are clearly not for the use of salmon farming in some respect. So if by stage 3 he can demonstrate that that has happened through the agriculture working group or whatever, I'll be more than happy to withdraw to that stage. But for the purposes of today, I'd like to press it just to make sure that we have that explicitly on the record.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 77 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. We are not agreed. There will be a division. All members in favour of the amendment, please show. 1. Those against. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Those abstaining. 1. There was 1 for, 7 against, 1 abstention. Therefore, Amendment 77 is not agreed. Therefore, we move to Amendment 19. In the name of the Minister, already debated with Amendment 77. Minister to move formally.
Moved, Convener.
Thank you. The question is Amendment 19 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. I call Amendment 20 in the name of the Minister, already debated with Amendment 77. Minister to move formally.
Moved, Convener.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 20 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. The question is that Section 4 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Thank you. The question is that Section 5 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Thank you. We move to Section 6, Appeals and Applications Procedure. Call Amendment 21 in the name of the Minister, group with Amendments 57, 22, 23, 24, 37 and 40. Minister to move Amendment 21 and speak to all the amendments in the group.
Thank you, Convener. I'm happy to speak to Amendment 21 and the others in this group. All of these amendments, except Amendment 23 and 57, make express provision for appeals and applications to the Sheriff to be made by way of summary application. I must emphasise that were the express provision not included in the text of the bill, the affected section of the bill would still have the same effect. The default rule is that an application or appeal to the Sheriff under an enactment is by way of summary application unless the enactment provides otherwise. However, the advice of the Sheriff Court Rules Council is that they would prefer it if in each of the sections with a right of appeal it were specified to make it perfectly clear the method by which the appeal is to be brought. These amendments to the bill are therefore simply to improve clarity and do not change the bill or its effect in any way. Similarly, Amendment 23 follows advice from Sheriff Court Rule Council that it would be preferable if the bill makes explicit provision for the court by which an appeal would be heard. This amendment therefore makes clear that any appeal against the decision of the Sheriff relating to a control scheme, which must be on a point of law only, lies to the Court of Session and not the Sheriff Principal. This should remove any ambiguity, and from a practical perspective, the higher court has the benefit of avoiding layers of appeal which might bring with it unhelpful and costly delays in seeking a resolution. Amendment 57 would double the length of time that a master, owner or operator of a wellboat has to appeal against an enforcement notice to a sheriff. I'm not clear why 14 days is considered more appropriate or who is suggesting that the current timescale needs to be revised. Marine Scotland has not received any representations on this issue, nor is it inconsistent with other legislation, the approach as proposed. The key issue for all concerned would be to see this matter dealt with as quickly as possible. For these reasons, I urge the committee to accept Amendments 21, 22, 23, 24, 37 and 40 and resist Amendment 57. I move Amendment 21.
Thank you. Tavish Scott to speak to Amendment 57 and other amendments in the group.
Grateful, Convener. In speaking to 57, the Minister may have answered the question, but the point I wanted to test there, to probe there, was the consistency in the bill, because in Section 16, page 16 of the bill, the government details appeals in connection with emergency action notices. And here in Section 16, page 16, the bill proposes a 14-day period for appeal, yet in this clause that the Minister is speaking to, the appeal is only 7 days. Now, there may be good legal reasons, or there may be good other reasons as to why there is a difference between that 7 and 14, and the Minister may have given them. But if he can illustrate to me that the bill is consistent in respect of those two clauses, then I'd be more than happy to withdraw this amendment.
Minister, no other members wish to speak? Okay. Minister, to wind up.
Thank you, Convener. I do recognise the point that Tavish Scott is making. What I am led to believe is that that this would be inconsistent. If we were to move to 14 days for this particular provision, we'd move to a position where it's inconsistent with other legislation. Therefore, I would continue to urge the committee to resist the amendment in Tavish Scott's name.
The question is that Amendment 21 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. We call Amendment 57 in the name of Tavish Scott, ready debated with Amendment 21. Tavish Scott to move.
With respect, I'm not sure I understood the answer, so you'll forgive me, I'm going to press it.
Okay. The question is that Amendment 57 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We have a disagreement. There will be a division. All members in favour of the amendment, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4. Those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The 4 for, 5 against. Therefore, this amendment is disagreed to. The question is that Section 6 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Section 7. I call the Amendment 58 in the name of Tavish Scott, while he's, I believe, withdrawn 58. But move or not move Amendment 77.
Sorry, 58.
Sorry. I call Amendment 58 in the name of Tavish Scott, ready debated with Amendment 77.
Withdrawn.
Withdrawn. Thank you very much. Sorry about the wording. So we move on. The question is that amendment, that Section 7 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The question is that Section 8 and 9 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Thank you. We move on to commercially damaging species surveillance and call Amendment 59 in the name of Tavish Scott in a group of its own. Tavish Scott to move and speak to the amendment.
Thank you very much, Convener. Here I want to absolutely accept the importance of this kind of work undertaken by the regulatory bodies, in this case Marine Scotland. That is clear, and it is part of the industry and the regulatory body relationship, and it should be. But what I want to ensure in this amendment is that the purposes and the specific measures, as I detail in my, and the duration of activities, as I detail in my amendment, are crystal clear. And I hope this is consistent with the theme of all the amendments I've been seeking to move, Convener, in respect to this bill, which is just to ensure that at all times the government and its regulatory bodies, in this case the Marine Scotland, have to be absolutely crystal clear in the purpose as to what they are absolutely doing. Point one, I accept the need for this work. That, of course, is the case. But point two is that they must detail it, and that is the purpose of this amendment, and I so move.
Minister, to respond, since there are no members wish to speak. Minister.
Okay, thank you, Convener. Well, I accept the concerns that Tavish Scott has expressed. I do not think this amendment is necessary and may in fact lead to delays in the successful control of a commercially damaging species. I believe that this amendment is unnecessary given there is already provision in section 10(3)(d) for the order to include provision about the matters which a programme of surveillance is able to address. We have received no representations from the shellfish industry, who are most likely to be impacted on this issue, and have experienced both of the circumstances in which these powers would be used and of the type of surveillance that would be undertaken. Furthermore, I believe that this amendment may be damaging, unintentionally I'm sure, given that it would require agreement on the detail of the surveillance activities to be reached with the fish or shellfish farmer themselves. This could weaken the measures required or lead to a delay in their implementation, which ultimately could lead to delays in the successful control of commercially damaging species. I therefore urge the committee to resist this amendment.
Thank you. Tavish Scott to wind up, press or withdraw.
Well, I certainly, Convener, appreciate that. I certainly don't mean to delay successful control, but on the Minister's point about no representations, it's parliamentarians' job to sometimes guess what may happen about such proposals in bills, and there are plenty of examples I can think of over the last number of years where the consequences of a bill have only come to pass afterwards, and industry has then popped up to say, why didn't you do something, why didn't you question this at the time? So I think it's our job in this place to do exactly this. And the final point the Minister made is in terms of weakening or delaying the control of what in effect would be a disease problem or a damaging set of circumstances. I mean, there is no way any commercial business is going to delay that or want to weaken a measure which will lead to the control of that situation, because they are losing money every day that is happening. So I don't think that's a legitimate point. But what I do think is that the industry and the government should expect of each other a degree of clarity and assuredness around what they are doing, and it would be, after all, open to the government to interpret this, if it were to become part of the statute, in respect of the particular way in which it would operate. And I don't think that would be beyond the wit of clever officials to do so. And therefore, I don't think those are legitimate concerns as to why this measure wouldn't strengthen the bill, and more to the point, just make it clear as to what was being sought. And I so move.
The question is that Amendment 59 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are not agreed. There will be a division. All members in favour of the amendment, please raise their hands. 1, 2. Those opposed, raise their hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 2 for, 7 against, no abstentions. Amendment 59 is not agreed to. The question is that Section 10 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The question is that sections 11 to 14 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? And I call Amendment 22 in the name of the Minister, already debated with Amendment 21. Minister to move formally.
Formally moved, Convener.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 22 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Amendment 22 is agreed. Call Amendment 23 in the name of the Minister, already debated with Amendment 21. The Minister moved formally. Thank you. The question is that Amendment 23 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. The question is that Schedule 1 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are. Agreed. The question is that section 15 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Section 16, I call Amendment 24 in the name of the Minister. Already debated with Amendment 21. The Minister to move formally.
Moved, Convener.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 24 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. The question is that Section 16 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. The question is that Sections 17 to 19 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. And then after Section 19, Marine Fish Farms Planning, I call Amendment 25 in the name of the Minister in a group of its own. Minister to speak, to move and speak to the amendment.
Thank you, Convener. I'm speaking to Government Amendment 25. This amendment relates to the audit and review process. This process is a time-limited process run by Scottish Government to determine planning permission for marine fish farms that were in existence before responsibility for marine aquaculture developments was transferred to local authorities in 2007. Ministers currently have the ability to grant planning permission by individual application or by order for specific classes of development covering multiple sites. This amendment addresses an issue that has been identified with the Town and Country Planning Marine Fish Farms Development Scotland Order 2011, which granted planning permission for classes of fish farms situated in marine waters specified in the order. Unfortunately, the descriptions of the marine waters used in that order has resulted in a number of fish farms having been given planning permission without having gone through the appropriate audit and review process. This amendment will enable those farms to be placed in the same position they were in before the order was made, ensuring in the process that they are not disadvantaged, and then take them through the audit and review process as necessary. I would like to emphasise this is largely a technical amendment which will not affect fish or shellfish farms other than those that I have outlined above.
Any other members who wish to speak? Alec Ferguson.
I seek a point of clarification to the Minister, if I may. My understanding, and I'm entirely likely to have got this wrong, but I would appreciate the clarification, is that the audit and review process will not be subject to any level of public scrutiny, unlike a normal planning application. And I just wondered whether the Minister feels that that is something that perhaps might have been addressed in the name of openness and transparency in this process.
Minister. Thank you, Convener. I'm happy to address a point. I mean, certainly I recognise that this amendment has been brought in at a late stage into the bill to address a problem which has been identified. There is an issue to do with the consultation, as the member has identified. This does affect only existing fish farms which are in operation already, and unfortunately I've got planning permission unintentionally due to the definition that was in the order, incorrectly defined terminology in the order. If it may help the convener, I can go through some of the technical issues just to explain. Hopefully, will clarify for the member where we're coming from in this particular amendment. Subsection 2 will enable Scottish Ministers to grant planning permission for the operation of an individual marine fish farm, either by order or by application to them. Subsection 3 ensures that the farms are not disadvantaged. Under this process, the appropriate date is the later of 31st of March 2014, or the date of expiry of the consent in place on 1st of April 2007, under which the fish farm is authorised to operate. And subsection 3 will provide that where planning permission is revoked by order before the appropriate date, planning permission will not be required as a result of previous grant of permission by the order until the appropriate date for the fish farm. This will ensure that any farms which have had planning permission revoked due to have being inadvertently given planning permission will be in the same position they were in before the order was made. As to the audit and review process itself, clearly, the provisions are put in place to ensure that appropriate checks and balances are put in place to take account of the environmental context in which the fish farm is to be consented or not. And so I can assure the member that the environmental factors will be considered as part of the audit and review, and we can come back with guidance to the committee on in advance of stage 3 as to what the implications might be for consultation.
Okay. The question is that Amendment 25 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Thank you, members. I want to suspend for a couple of minutes to change over the officials at this stage, and we will break for a couple of minutes just now to do so. The Aquaculture Bill, Stage 2, Section 20, District Salmon Fishery Boards, Governance. I call the Amendment 26, the name of the Minister, group with Amendments 27, 28, 29. Minister to move 26 and speak to all the amendments in the group.
Thank you, Convener. As the committee turns to part 2 of the bill, I would like to take the opportunity to remark on the policy themes for this part and provide some context to your considerations, if that's acceptable. Good governance and the promotion of openness, transparency and accountability are key themes that run through part 2. I'm pleased the committee in its Stage 1 report welcomed the good governance obligations as I quote, a necessary and welcome step in improving accountability and openness in boards' affairs, unquote. I am also pleased that the ASFB have indicated their support for new responsibilities placed on DSFBs, and we will work with them to develop guidance for boards in complying. In doing so, we are mindful that boards vary in size and resources, and I know that's a matter of concern to a number of committee members. As I indicated in Stage 1, the bill is the first step in delivering our manifesto commitment to modernise the management structures for salmon and freshwater fisheries. The second step is an independent review, which I anticipate will commence this summer, designed to deliver a management system which is robust, sustainable and fit for purpose in the 21st century. The committee's Stage 1 report indicated support for this two-stage approach and recommended a number of areas which might usefully be examined. These views are helpful and will inform the scoping process. In the meantime, the bill provides or places good governance obligations on DSFBs designed to drive forward and roll out best practice in conducting business. The obligations are founded on behaviours and practices which are well accepted as the norm in public sector landscape. DSFBs are not public bodies, but their functions are set out in statute and they have statutory responsibilities. The obligations are designed to promote openness, transparency and accountability in the conduct of their affairs. I'm bringing forward minor amendments to this section on good governance to streamline a particular process to be followed by the clerk to the board and to clarify the use of the ministerial power to modify the good governance obligations by order. Improving public access to and involvement in the meetings of DSFBs is a key tool in promoting transparency and accountability and fostering community involvement in the activities of boards. It is right that boards are open and accessible to those with an interest in fisheries. It is right that they seek to include the public in their affairs. In addition to a general presumption that all meetings of DSFBs are open to the public and publicised as such, the bill includes specific requirements to hold an annual public meeting and to notify and the annual proprietors meeting to the general public, salmon anglers and netsmen and Scottish ministers. These notification requirements must, of course, be proportionate and workable in practice. There were discussions at Stage 1 about how the clerk to a board might fulfil the notification requirement to inform salmon anglers and tenant netsmen in their district. In response to this feedback, I am bringing forward an amendment to streamline the notification procedure. It can reasonably be expected these groups will be informed either via the general notification obligations placed on the clerk or through the representatives who are co-opted onto the board in accordance with Schedule 2 of the 2003 Act. Amendment 26 removes the specific requirement for DSFBs to give notice of their annual public meeting and the annual meeting of proprietors to salmon anglers and the tenant netsmen in their district. The bill includes a power for Scottish ministers to amend the good governance provisions by order. It is important that there is flexibility for the obligations to be modified to reflect changes in the governance landscape without the need for primary legislation. However, I note the Subordinate Legislation Committee's observation at Stage 1 that the modification power as drafted is potentially too wide in scope and could allow for dilution or in fact removal of the requirements. I agree that use of the power should be qualified to bring it into line with the scope of the power contained in new section 46F1B of the 2003 Act to add further requirements. Amendments 27, 28 and 29 ensure that modification can only be made for specified purposes associated with promoting openness, accountability, propriety and good governance. I move Amendment 26.
Thank you. Jim Hume?
Yes, thank you, Convener. Just really on 26, which basically is taking out the part that you would have to send a copy of notice to salmon anglers and tenant netsmen, which I appreciate would be difficult identifying all salmon anglers and obviously quite expensive. I had thought perhaps an amendment to that to be a representative of salmon anglers and tenant netsmen may have been more appropriate, but of course we do have tenant netsmen and salmon anglers already on district fishery boards, and if the Minister's happy to assure that that's the way he wants to continue, I would be happy to support that motion amendment at this stage.
Thank you. Minister, to wind up.
Certainly in relation to the report that Jim Hume has made, I agree that it's good that there's representation on fisheries boards from those groups that were mentioned, and that is a means by which the notification can be communicated. So I certainly give that assurance that is our intention.
No, thank you. The question is that Amendment 26 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
I call Amendments 27, 28 and 29 all in the name of the Minister and all previously debated, and invite the Minister to move the Amendments 27 to 29 en bloc.
Moved.
Ask any member object to them being moved en bloc. There being no objection. If no member is there, for the question is that Amendments 27 to 29 are agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. The question is that Section 20 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Section 21, the application of orders and regulations under the 2003 Act. I call Amendment 30 in the name of the Minister, grouped with Amendments 32, 3, 4, 33 and 5. I point out that if Amendment 32 is agreed to, then Amendment 3 is preempted. So I ask the Minister to move Amendment 30 and speak to all the amendments in the group.
Thank you, Convener. District salmon fishery boards have statutory responsibilities to protect and improve salmon fisheries in their district, and a number of powers to draw on to allow them to do so. In keeping with the themes of openness, accountability and transparency, the Bill seeks to improve boards' engagement with all relevant interested parties and the wider public, promoting professional, science-based management. Acknowledging their local management role and responsibilities, my preference is for district salmon fisheries boards to develop and implement voluntary, locally agreed management measures without recourse to intervention by national government or to statute. Of course, this may not always be possible, and the 2003 Act provides that boards can apply to Scottish ministers for statutory measures. Where they are requested, it is my and Parliament's expectation that applications should be well evidenced in terms of need and impact. The Bill introduces a requirement on applicants, and in practice these will be district salmon fisheries boards, to consult with known interested parties and the general public on management measures they consider require statutory backing, and have regard to the representations received. I want boards to reach out to the communities they operate in to inform and evidence their management plans. The requirement to consult prior to submitting an application for statutory measures fits with the themes of openness, accountability and transparency. The amendments in this group deal with a specific issue of how boards engage with the general public and report back to the wider community. There was discussion during stage 1 about the proportionality of the requirements and the perceived administrative and financial burdens of requiring boards to publish notice in a local newspaper. I have listened to these concerns, and Government Amendments 30, 32 and 33 reduce the number of times a board is required to publish a notice in a local newspaper from 3 to 2. This reduces the administrative and financial burden on boards, but upholds the policy objective of meaningful consultation with the public. Alex Ferguson's amendments also have the effect of reducing the administrative and financial burden on boards, but, I believe, go too far and lose the essence of meaningful consultation. Relaxing the procedures by which the applicant should report back to the wider public community on the outcome of a consultation represents a loss in the accountability process. I believe there is a need for safeguards to ensure proper publicity for all interested parties. Removing the requirement to consult after ministers have assessed an application but before the measure is made removes a vital part of the process in Schedule 1 to the 2003 Act, which is linked to the potential calling of a local public inquiry. I urge members to resist Amendments 3, 4 and 5. I share the committee's observations that boards vary in size and resource, and I know that is a point that has been raised by Alex Ferguson himself in previous debates. I do not wish to place disproportionate burdens on them, but there is a balance to be struck, and I consider that the costs associated with pre-application consultation as the process is modified by Amendments 30, 32 and 33 to be proportionate. I encourage members to support these amendments, and I move Amendment 30.
Thank you. Alex Ferguson to speak to Amendment 3 and other amendments in the group.
Thank you, Convener. I entirely agree that this is indeed a question of proportionality. Section 21 includes a duty on the district salmon fishery boards, as the Minister has said, to consult and report before making certain applications. I don't have a problem with the general principle of that at all. But I do think without amendment, the requirement will compel district salmon fishery boards to publish or advertise in a newspaper. It was to be 3, but I accept that the Minister's amendments will reduce that to 2 during the process. But it will also still be required to do so once under Schedule 1 of the 2003 Act, at the end of that process. So there will still be a requirement to publish 3 times. And I feel that this is overly prescriptive, especially when you think of some of the smaller boards, particularly when you consider that many of the interested parties, stakeholders, if you like to call them that, are more than likely to be represented on those boards in the first instance. Now, my amendments would still continue the requirement to publish, but would remove the necessity and the not inconsiderable cost of having to do so in a newspaper after the first instance. There are other ways to publish other than a newspaper. I think my amendments 3 and 4 would fulfil the understandable need for consultation and information, but in a more proportionate and, if I may say so, slightly less dictatorial manner. Amendment 5 simply allows, it's a drafting change really, that simply allows ministers to waive the obligation to give notice under section 1, paragraph 11 of the 2003 Act if they believe that adequate notice has already been given. I would wish to move my amendments.
Thank you. I have no indication. Yes, Jim Hume wants to speak.
Is it just one indication? Yes, thank you, Convener. Just regarding 3 and 4 and Alex Ferguson's amendments to remove the need to advertise basically in the newspapers. I think the Minister will know the area that we both cover. There's several local newspapers. You could perhaps be advertising in a very small one that perhaps, for example, just covered Selkirk, and we'll use the Selkirk Weekend Advertiser as one. That may be the cheapest, maybe the cheapest option for the Tweed board, but obviously wouldn't cover the whole of the area. So I have sympathy with Alex Ferguson and what he's trying to do here, and would therefore be supporting his amendments.
Okay, Minister, I'm calling you to wind up and see if we can get some more product placement into it.
Despite the concern of being alleged to be dictatorial in any way, I'll resist the urge to respond. I think I've made all the points, Convener, that I need to make.
Thank you very much. Then the question is that Amendment 30 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. No, we are not agreed. There will be a division. All members in favour of the amendment, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4. Sorry, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 in favour. Those against, please show. 1, 2, 3. Against. Any abstentions? Do you want to abstain? Thank you. The answer is then that there were 3 against, 5 for, and 1 abstention. Therefore, the amendment is agreed to. I call Amendment 32 in the name of the Minister already debated with Amendment 30.
Formally moved.
And if 32 is agreed, then Amendment 3 is preempted. So, Minister has formally moved. The question is that Amendment 32 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. No, we're not agreed. We are not agreed. Can the no's... I mean, the no... You'll have to say it once again. Thank you. In that case, there will be a division. Those in favour of Amendment 32, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those against... 1, 2, 3, 4. There were 5 in favour and 4 against. Therefore, Amendment 32 is agreed to. We go to Amendment 4, and it's the name of Alec Ferguson, already debated with Amendment 30. Alec Ferguson, to move or not move?
Well, given that any order on the River Bladnoch would have to be published in the Galloway Gazette, the Wintershire Free Press and the Galloway News, I do intend to move.
Okay. Alec Ferguson has moved. The question is that Amendment 4 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are not agreed. There will be a division. Those in favour of Amendment 4, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4, appropriately. And those against, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There were 5 against, 4 for, and therefore the amendment is not agreed to. Call Amendment 33 in the name of the Minister, already debated with Amendment 30. Minister, to move formally.
Formally moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 33 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are not agreed. There will be a division. Those in favour of Amendment 33, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those against, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4. There were 5 for and 4 against. Therefore, Amendment 33 is agreed to. I call Amendment 5 in the name of Alec Ferguson, already debated with Amendment 30. Alec Ferguson, to move or not move?
Move, Convener.
Amendment 5 has been moved. Therefore, the question is that Amendment 5 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The amendment is not agreed. There will be a division. Those in favour of Amendment 5, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4. Those against Amendment 5, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Amendment 5 is not agreed. There were 4 for and 5 against. The question is that Section 21 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Then we move on to Section 22, which is about salmon carcass tagging. And I call Amendment 89 in the name of Alec Ferguson, group with Amendments 90 and 34. And I call Alec Ferguson to move Amendment 89 and speak to all the amendments in the group.
I thank you, Convener. I think this is quite a simple issue myself. In our Stage 1 report, the committee very much supported the individual numbering of tags and was quite clear that any tagging scheme that did not include individually numbered tags would be rendered essentially ineffective. Any tagging scheme has to be about traceability. And if I could return to the agricultural theme that Tavish Scott introduced with his tractor, as a former sheep farmer, I'm well aware that every sheep that goes to slaughter has to have an ear tag, one in each ear, in fact, for identification purposes. Those tags are individually numbered, and every movement of each individual animal is logged and recorded. Every animal is therefore identified and traceable throughout its entire life. Without the individual numbering of tags and recording of the use of those tags, any wider benefits of a tagging scheme will be completely lost. By way of example, I would give you any scheme to minimise the market for illegally caught fish. There would be no traceability, no means of control over tags that had been issued or even copied. The scheme would be wide open to abuse. Amendment 89, therefore, proposes that any tagging scheme that is introduced uses individual, uniquely numbered tags which must be recorded in a manner to be determined by ministers. On Amendment 90, Section 22 states that a person commits an offence if that person sells, offers or exposes for sale or is in possession of any salmon that has not been tagged in accordance with the regulations or has had its tag removed. But there is no specific offence for buying an untagged fish. Now, in Sections 16, 17 and 19 of the 2003 Act, there are specific offences for buying as well as selling. And by proposing Amendment 90, I simply seek to tidy up what I see as a loophole in this legislation that would make it illegal to sell but not to buy a rod-caught salmon.
Minister, to speak to Amendment 34 and other amendments in the group.
Thank you, Convener. The committee has noted the significant support for the introduction of a carcass tagging scheme and agreed that an enabling power is the appropriate vehicle to bring this forward. But while there is considerable support for a scheme, there is no agreement at present between sectors on what the scheme would actually look like or should look like. Alex Ferguson's amendments seek to prescribe the enabling power, restricting the flexibility of Scottish ministers to make provision for a carcass tagging scheme. This approach presents difficulties and I urge members to resist Amendment 89. I do appreciate the good intention on the part of Alex Ferguson, but it does present us with some problems. The purpose of enabling powers is to allow ministers to make certain provisions. The detail of the carcass tagging scheme will be set out in regulations in due course, an approach approved by the committee. I have made clear my intention to consult fully on the detail of the scheme before bringing regulations to Parliament. And I do note the point that Tavish Scott made earlier on in terms of the degree of scrutiny hereafter, but I'll certainly do whatever I can to ensure that there's appropriate scrutiny of this. I note the committee and others' preference for numbered tags. This will be a key element of the consultation with all interested parties, as will the impact of the scheme on individual businesses. In addition, seeking to introduce this style of technical detail via primary legislation is not standard practice because of the requirements of the EU Technical Standards Directive. The directive requires that Member States notify any new measures they introduce to the European Commission which might create a technical barrier to trade. A notified provision is subject to a minimum standstill period before it can come into force. This can be up to 18 months, and this notification process would have implications for the bill timetable as a whole if it were enacted. Turning to Amendment 34 in my name, the bill provides that the carcass tagging regulations may modify Part 5 of the 2003 Act. Part 5 is the part of the Act which deals with enforcement, including the powers of bailiffs and wardens. I note and concur with the Subordinate Legislation Committee's view that affirmative procedure be followed where regulations seek to amend primary legislation. Amendment 34 requires that affirmative procedure is followed if the carcass tagging regulations seek to amend Part 5 of the Act to make use of the bailiffing and wardening systems for the scheme. I encourage members to support, therefore, Amendment 34. Amendment 90 seeks to modify the offence provision associated with the carcass tagging regulations to make purchase of salmon not tagged in accordance with the regulations an offence. I understand this is due to concerns, as has been set out by Alex Ferguson, about a perceived loophole in the law about the purchase of rod-caught salmon. I consider the bill as introduced has the potential to close that loophole because the term possession includes possession as a result of purchase. I'm not persuaded that inclusion of the word buy is necessary at this time, and as such do not support the amendment. I consider that if there are wider concerns about the offences associated with salmon fishing, these are best considered in the context of the forthcoming work to review more broadly the management of salmon and freshwater fisheries in Scotland, and I urge members to resist Amendment 90.
Claudia Beamish.
I would just like to highlight for the record that I do have a commitment to trying to take forward the identification by numbered tags, but in this instance that I take the point that the Minister has raised and clarified about how that could proceed, and I do believe it's extremely important that there is the wide-ranging consultation before that comes forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Alex Ferguson, to wind up, press or withdraw?
Well, I'm far from convinced that the including the requirement for tags to be individually numbered at this stage of the legislation would in any way detract from further negotiations, discussions, consultation that would take place on that. I hear what the Minister says about delaying the bill's timetable. Obviously, one doesn't wish to do that. But I think this is a hugely important issue and one that is of considerable concern and did reach a great level of agreement in the committee. I'm inclined to withdraw this amendment because I think I would like to come back to it at stage 3, and that is what I think I propose to do. On Amendment 90, I hear what the Minister says, and if I picked him up right, I'd be grateful if he could just clarify this. He says that possession includes possession through purchase. May I just ask for clarification?
That is my understanding of what the term of the bill actually specifies.
In which case I am satisfied with that answer. I still think the word buy leaves no dubiety whatsoever, and therefore on that basis I would seek to move amendment, when the time comes, move Amendment 90. But I will withdraw Amendment 89 with the permission of the members.
Okay. The question is that Amendment 89 be agreed to, and indeed the member has sought to withdraw that amendment. With the agreement of the committee, does any other member wish to object to the amendment being withdrawn? No other member has. Therefore, that amendment is withdrawn. I call Amendment 90 in the name of Alex Ferguson, already debated with Amendment 89. Alex Ferguson, to move or not move?
Move, Convener.
The question is that Amendment 90 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are not agreed. Those in favour of Amendment 90, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4. Those opposed, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're 4 for, 5 against. Therefore, Amendment 90 is not agreed to. I call Amendment 34 in the name of the Minister, already debated with Amendment 89. Minister, to move formally.
Formally moved.
Thank you. Question is that Amendment 34 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed to Amendment 34. The question is that Section 22 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The question is that Sections 23 and 24 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Thank you. Move to Section 25. Monitoring and evaluating the effects of the orders. And call Amendment 6 in the name of Alec Ferguson, group with Amendment 7, 35, 8, 9, 36 and 10. Alec Ferguson to move Amendment 6. Speak to all the amendments in the group.
Thank you again, Convener. And if I could begin by addressing Amendments 6, 8 and 10, and then come to 7 and 9, I would be grateful. But again, in relation to 6, 8 and 10, these amendments are principally about proportionality. It's not unreasonable at all that ministers should be able to impose conservation measures on any board or indeed individual proprietor in the right circumstances. And I think it's absolutely right that those measures should be properly monitored and evaluated. I don't have an issue with that. But as we're all aware, and as I've already said in early amendments, boards vary widely in size and indeed in resources and levels of expertise. And I don't think this is a situation where one size necessarily fits all. I think there needs to be a greater degree of proportionality in the process. When a board applies for an order, there will be discussions. When a board applies for an order proactively, there will be discussions with the appropriate officials about the required levels of monitoring for proper evaluation before it's even agreed whether or not to go ahead with the proposed actions. But under this bill, ministers could take out an order. I'm not saying they would, but and I agree with Tavish Scott that I'm quite sure this minister wouldn't, but you won't be there forever, Minister. Promotion beckons, I'm sure. But under this bill, ministers could take out an order entirely of their own initiative and then place a legally binding monitoring requirement on the board or proprietor without any prior discussion or consultation whatsoever. Now, it's entirely possible that such an order could be taken out without there having been any local sense, if you like, that there's even a need for that order, or the measure, and indeed that the measure is simply imposed almost in an unnecessary way. And I think that just seems to me to be rather two-handed in this day and age of openness and consultation. My Amendment 6, 8 and 10 would simply seek to ensure that Scottish ministers have a duty to consult with the relevant stakeholders prior to taking out any order, and for those consultations to include the financial implications, the cost, in other words, of any actions to be taken. Now, I think we would all want ministers and governments to act fairly, reasonably and responsibly in taking decisions of this nature. If ministers have a duty to consult on the costs of their proposed actions, as my amendment would insist on, then there is, I think, bound to be a more reasonable outcome arrived at in respect of any obligations placed on district salmon fishery boards and indeed any individual proprietors. If I could come to Amendments 7 and 9, Convener, these amendments are also about proportionality. Section 75 allows district salmon fishery boards to be criminalised by failing to monitor the effects of an order. And the sanction that's been set is at level 4 on the standard scale. Now, level 4, according to the Scottish Government's website, is, and I quote, the lowest that can reasonably be made as an alternative to a custodial sentence. The website also goes on to state that level 4 sanctions are appropriate for offences. I can't even read my own writing here, Minister, and forgive me, are appropriate for offences posing appreciable or culpable risks to health or safety, such as careless driving. Now, I can't see that that level of sanction is going to actually encourage people to give of their own time to help in the work of a district salmon fishery board, which rely very greatly on voluntary input, as it can only act, I think, as a huge disincentive. Now, if the Scottish Government really believes that a criminal offence is appropriate in this instance, then surely a level 3 sanction would be more appropriate. According to that same website, level 3 is commonly the penalty for serious nuisances and is also used for serious breaches of administrative procedures, perhaps motivated by financial or other reward. And I think it seems to me to be an altogether more appropriate level of sanction. No one is against monitoring or evaluation of orders, and I would strongly emphasise that. But what I'm seeking here is that we all keep it in perspective. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you. Minister, to speak to Amendment 35 and other amendments in the group.
Thank you, Convener. I've spoken already this morning about the role of district salmon fisheries boards as local managers of salmon fisheries and highlighted this government's preference for locally agreed voluntary conservation measures where these are needed, and made clear the expectation that where statutory measures are sought, these are clearly evidenced in terms of need and impact. I just want to pick up a couple of points before I proceed, just with regard to what Alex Ferguson has raised. I certainly recognise where the member's coming from in terms of his comments, but just to re-emphasise that, firstly, government would never introduce any secondary legislation without consultation. When it comes to the issue about degree, and I'll come on to degree, in terms of degree of the charging structure, boards are liable for fines, not individuals, members of District Salmon Fisheries Boards, so hopefully we'll address that later on. And also that in provisions in the 2003 Act, there are already similar provisions already in place. But I'll just carry on with what I was going to say. I have also made clear I do not wish to place a disproportionate burden on boards and recognise that this is the main driver behind Alex Ferguson's amendments, as he has sought throughout this process to try and take account of the different sizes of and resources of boards. I recognise that. Alex Ferguson's amendments place responsibility on Scottish ministers to consult on any monitoring and evaluation requirements they wish to impose on boards, and hence the comment about government's approach in terms of secondary legislation as well. It is hard to argue that where national intervention is required to resolve local management issues, there should not be a responsibility, though, on local managers to monitor the impact of that intervention in line with ministers' expectations. Indeed, if we were expecting a District Salmon Fisheries Board to be bringing forward a business case, integral to that should be appropriate monitoring and evaluation arrangements, I would suggest. Monitoring is a recognised way of assessing efficacy and promoting science-based management of fisheries. There is broader interest in the effectiveness of measures given statutory approval by this Parliament, and a responsibility in all parties to share information widely to aid national understanding of fisheries management tools. In practice, monitoring plans should form, as I say, part of the case for measures and will be discussed between the Board and the Scottish Government during assessment of the application in each case. That discussion will include financial costs, and it's not in anyone's interest for government to impose disproportionate financial burdens on boards. On that basis, I recommend that Amendments 6, 8 and 10 are resisted. Amendments 7 and 9 reduce the level of fine capable of being levied on conviction for the offence of failing to monitor regulations or orders under Sections 33 and 37. Monitoring and evaluation of management measures is a key component in fisheries management, and there must be a sanction for failure to comply, and the level of fine must act as a deterrent. I consider, and as I said earlier, that the fine would apply to the board, not to the individual. So I recognise the point the member's making about disincentives for people to join District Salmon Fisheries Boards, but it's not the individual who'd be liable for the fine, it is the board that would be liable for the fine. I consider that failure to take action to monitor statutory measures is a serious offence that merits a maximum fine of £2,500 rather than £1,000, and I urge members to resist these amendments as well. Amendments 35 and 36 in my name are brought forward in response to discussion with stakeholders about the nature of the offence of failure to monitor. Due to the nature of the activity and enforcement systems, there are a number of offences in the 2003 Act which can be prosecuted on single witness evidence. However, on reflection, I am of the view that offences of failure to monitor under Section 33 and 37 of the Act should be subject to the usual Scots law rules of evidence and require corroboration. In proposing this amendment, members will be aware there are wider steps that will be taken in the forthcoming Criminal Justice Bill by the Cabinet Secretary for Justice that will, if approved by Parliament, lead to the need for corroborated evidence being abolished for all offences. That should not stop members agreeing this amendment dealing with this very specific offence, but members will want to note wider developments, and I ask members to support Amendments 35 and 36.
Alex Ferguson, to move, of course, but also to wind up and press or withdraw, because when you're proposing your amendments in the first place, you should be saying I move them at that time. Thank you.
I stand corrected, Convener. My apologies. I will make up for that, I can assure you. I hear what the Minister says about his willingness to address some of these issues in secondary legislation. But I do come back to the point that's already been made by members this morning. Secondary legislation does not receive the same level of scrutiny, if any level of scrutiny, within this Parliament. And that is not a fault of any government or individual. It is a fault of the structure of the Parliament, I think. But we all, those of us that have been here long enough, realise that that is the case. So I do intend to press Amendments 6, 8 and 10. On 7 and 9, I'm interested when the Minister said, I didn't find his answer entirely convincing, I have to say. I think he said that individuals would not be required to pay any level of, or any sanction that was put on against them. But my understanding is that an order can be taken out against an individual, just as it can be taken out against a board, and therefore surely it would be the individual that would be liable to any sanction that they fell liable to. The Minister may want to clarify, in which case I'd be happy.
Minister?
Yes, I mean, I think this comes down to in terms of the law, eyes of the law, a company or a board in this case has a legal identity, is the individual that is being prosecuted for the offence in this case. That's my understanding of it, and therefore the board is liable for the fine, not the individuals who are members of the board. So I hope that clarifies my understanding, at least. I appreciate Mr Ferguson may not agree with it, but that is our interpretation of the law.
I'm slightly unsatisfied. It's not that I disagree or not, Minister. I just find I'm slightly in an unsatisfactory place on this because I'm not sure that it's entirely clear.
Just that we can write to the committee, obviously, to give clarity on that point in advance of stage 3, if that would be of benefit to the committee.
Ferguson?
I do intend to press, Convener.
Okay, thank you very much. So the question is that Amendment 6 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. We are not agreed. There will be a division. All members in favour of Amendment 6, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4. Those against, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there were 4 for, 5 against, no abstentions. Therefore, Amendment 6 is not agreed to. Call Amendment 7 in the name of Alec Ferguson. Already debated with Amendment 6. Alec Ferguson to move or not move?
Move, Convener.
Moved. The question is that Amendment 7 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. We are not agreed. There will be a division. Those in favour of Amendment 7, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4. Those against, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There were 4 for, 5 against, no abstentions. Therefore, Amendment 7 is not agreed to. I call Amendment 35 in the name of the Minister. Already debated with Amendment 6. Minister to move formally.
Moved, Convener.
The question is that Amendment 35 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed to Amendment 35. Call Amendment 8 in the name of Alec Ferguson. Already debated with Amendment 6. Alec Ferguson to move or not move?
Moved, Convener.
Amendment. Therefore, the question is Amendment 8 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. We are not agreed. Those in favour of Amendment 8, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4. Those against Amendment 8, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Amendment 8, 4 for, 5 against, not agreed. Call Amendment 9 in the name of Alec Ferguson. Right, debated with Amendment 6. Alec Ferguson to move or not move?
Not moved, Convener.
Not moved. The Minister, therefore, we call Amendment 36 in the name of the Minister. Already debated with Amendment 6. Minister to move formally.
Formally moved.
The question is that Amendment 36 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. We call Amendment 10 in the name of Alec Ferguson. Already debated with Amendment 6. Alec Ferguson to move or not move?
Moved, Convener.
Moved. The question is that Amendment 10 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are not agreed. There will be a division. Those in favour of Amendment 10, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4. Those against, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 4 for, 5 against. Therefore, amendment is not agreed. The question is that Section 25 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. The question is that 26 to 28 sections be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. We move to Section 29, and this is offences exempted by permission or consent. Call Amendment 60 in the name of Jim Hume, grouped with Amendment 61. Jim Hume to move Amendment 60 and speak to both amendments in the group.
Thank you very much, Convener. These two amendments I feel would strengthen the bill. As for district fishery boards are active, and there is often a well-established history of electro-fishing by those district fishing boards. That's of course important in recording the health of our rivers and burns. It's therefore important that if there are others electrofishing in the same waters as those district fishery boards, that those boards are consulted. Otherwise, sampling could occur at similar times, which could, of course, have a negative impact on especially juvenile fish and, of course, invertebrates. Electrofishing is fairly harmless, but if young stock's exposed on perhaps the same day twice, then that could result in a negative consequence. The other amendment, at present, district fishery boards have to request consent during closed times to electrofish for research purposes. The same goes for collecting broodstock for hatcheries to restock rivers. This is an anomaly and a waste of, I think, valuable government resource. Electrofishing doesn't have any long-term effect on river stock and in fact gives valuable information, as said before, to help the health of our rivers, as does using caught broodstock for hatcheries where appropriate. It shouldn't be labelled the same as rod fishing. We're rightly under the laws of closed times. This amendment would also free up government resource, would allow district fishery boards to also stop wasting time and money on continually requesting consents to ministers, and allow them to consent such activities throughout the year when appropriate for, of course, scientific and conservation reasons. I therefore move amendments 60 and 61 in my name.
Thank you. Amendment 60 first of all. So any other members wish to discuss this? No. Minister to respond.
Thank you, Convener. If at the outset I could just clarify, I think from the benefit of Mr Hume, electrofishing, as I understand it, could inadvertently, appreciate inadvertently rather than deliberately, catch a species such as an eel, which is a protected species, and therefore it would be in contravention of requirements to protect that species, and therefore requires electrofishing. Therefore, in our view, requires regulation. Convener, in its Stage 1 report, the committee endorsed the general principles of the bill. The bill seeks to promote openness, transparency and accountability, as I've said previously. It seeks to enhance salmon management through a more robust and consistent consenting regime, promoting science-based management. Amendment 60 does not reflect these general principles and the direction of travel, in our opinion. It gives district salmon fishery boards powers to consent and carry out activities which would otherwise be illegal during the annual and weekly close time. The annual and weekly close times have a clear and important purpose: salmon conservation. They are set out in statute, and variations require ministerial and parliamentary approval. Ministers therefore have a legitimate interest in the oversight of activities undertaken during the periods which are set aside for conservation purposes. I am not persuaded that ministers should relinquish responsibility for that oversight for the reasons I have just given. Also relevant to this discussion is the evidence heard by the committee at Stage 1 from Scottish Natural Heritage. SNH had concerns about the ability of some boards to comply with their obligations, particularly around consenting activities. Notably, SNH supports strongly the power in the bill for ministers to revoke, remove, restrict or modify District Salmon Fishery Board powers to consent salmon introductions. They do not support this amendment. Given this context, I urge members to resist Amendment 60. It represents, in our view, a backward step in terms of openness and transparency, and seeks to dilute ministers' legitimate interest in activities carried out during the annual and weekly close times. Amendment 61 introduces a statutory requirement for boards to be consulted as part of obtaining permission from Scottish ministers to carry out activities related to non-salmonid fish, which would otherwise be illegal. I recognise that the issue behind this amendment is a desire to manage the interactions between the salmon and freshwater fishery sectors. Both sectors carry out activities in the same environment, and it is right that there is closer engagement between the two. However, the amendment creates a statutory obligation for boards to be consulted on non-salmon activities, but there is no parallel obligation on boards to consult with freshwater interests. This would create an imbalance between the sectors, creating a hierarchy rather than a level playing field. The issue of how fisheries for any species interact with one another is a key point for the forthcoming review. I have made clear that I wish to look at the management of Scottish fisheries as a whole, and that will include how they interact with each other. In the meantime, I consider that greater focus can be placed on encouraging all parties to engage with one another to develop joint approaches to undertaking work on each river. I recommend to members that Amendment 61 is resisted.
Jim Hume to wind up, press or withdraw.
Thank you, Convener. I shall be pressing both my amendments. I still do believe that the district fishery boards are best locally set in the local situations, are in a good position to be able to almost guarantee, if you like, that electrofishing won't be duplicated in the same areas, albeit for different species. And I still think that may have a negative impact, an unintended consequence. I would appreciate if the Minister would take these two amendments and consider them. I'm sure they will not pass today, but I shall press them both today.
So the question is that Amendment 60 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. We are not agreed. There will be a division. All members in favour of Amendment 60, please show. 1, 2. Those opposed, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those abstaining, 2. There were 2 for, 5 against, 2 abstentions. Therefore, Amendment 60 is not agreed. I call Amendment 61 in the name of Jim Hume, already debated with Amendment 60. Jim Hume, to move or not move? Moved. Therefore, the question is that Amendment 61 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. We are not agreed. There will be a division. Those in favour of the amendment, please show. 1, 2. Those against the amendment, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And those abstaining, 2. 2 for, 5 against, 2 abstain. Therefore, Amendment 61 is disagreed. The question is that Section 29 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Right, after Section 29, regulations on the right to buy salmon fisheries. I call Amendment 62 in the name of Claudia Beamish in a group of its own. Claudia Beamish to move and speak to the amendment.
Thank you, There's a significant potential for netting effort to increase in future, although this is uncertain. And indeed, the high price of wild salmon and sea trout has meant that a number of previously dormant and lightly fished stations have been reopened. Analysis by ASFB of the District Assessor's valuation rolls demonstrated that there were at least 129 dormant netting stations which have the potential to come back into operation of varying sizes. I'm therefore of the view that when a netting station is put up for sale or is to be leased by a third party, the relevant District Salmon Fisheries Board should, in the interests of salmon conservation, have a statutory right of first refusal or lease for that netting operation before any proposed sale or lease could proceed. Such a right would not be prejudicial to the fishery owner, who would still have to receive appropriate compensation for the value of the fishery, thus protecting the private heritable rights of the fishery owner. It would not prevent such fisheries continuing to operate, but would prevent a significant increase in commercial exploitation, of which, in my view, there is a risk, which flies in the face of internationally accepted best practice. There is also the concern, in my understanding, about the netting of mixed fisheries, which has been raised with us. During stage 1, the Minister emphasised his concern that decommissioned sites remained decommissioned. However, there is currently no mechanism to ensure that this remains the case. In cognizance of the Scottish Government official Willie Cowan's concern at evidence that such a scheme would be a substantial amendment to take forward at stage 2, this amendment is designed simply to give Scottish ministers a power to introduce such measures through secondary regulations. And the new power for Scottish ministers to make regulations to grant salmon fishery boards a right of first refusal to purchase dormant coastal fishing rights is something that I support in this amendment. Thank you.
Does he know Alec Ferguson wish to speak?
No, I'd just like to say that I'm broadly supportive of this amendment. I think one of the things that it would allow to do, as well as the many benefits that Claudia Beamish has mentioned, is that it would also give the opportunity for district salmon fishery boards to purchase salmon netting rights for conservation reasons. Conservation played quite a large part in all of the evidence we took, and I think is a good reason for supporting this particular amendment, which I propose to do.
No other members wish to speak. Minister, respond.
Thank you, Convener. Convener, I confess I was a little surprised that Amendment 52 has been brought forward at this time, although I do appreciate the explanation that Claudia Beamish has given. The committee's Stage 1 report signalled support for my two-stage approach. delivering modernised management structures for salmon and freshwater fisheries, and specifically indicated that the issue of management of coastal netting should be considered in the context of the forthcoming independent review. Now, I hear what Claudia Beamish is saying about providing the enabling powers, if you like, for something to happen subsequently. I am committed to salmon conservation, and let me be clear about that. The Scottish Government has obligations to the EU and commitments to international community, which we take very seriously indeed. These factors are a key driver for the forthcoming review, and we must have a management system which is fit for purpose in the 21st century. The Scottish Government promotes science-based management of fisheries, and the ownership of a fishing right in itself is not an evidence-based management tool to conserve salmon stocks. It is how that right is actually managed ultimately, and how it's exercised that matters. District salmon fisheries boards and Scottish ministers already have a range of tools to manage and control how fishing rights are exercised. And as I've already made clear, my preference is for locally agreed voluntary conservation measures where there is evidence of need. Where local voluntary approaches cannot be agreed, applications for statutory measures can of course be made. And furthermore, this bill strengthens the powers of ministers to make conservation measures at their own hand. But we're far from complacent, and that's why we view the bill as the first step, and I stress the first step, in modernising the management regime, and have announced the forthcoming independent review. Given this wider context, I'm not yet convinced that the amendment proposed by Claudia Beamish is necessary at this point, and I also have reservations about its potential impact on private property rights and introducing controls on those rights, and therefore I urge members to resist Amendment 52.
Claudia Beamish, to wind up, press or withdraw?
I'd like to press Amendment 62. Do I wind up now, please?
Yes.
Right, thank you. I've listened carefully to what the Minister has said, and I do note what you say, what the Minister says about the independent review. I also think that the issue of conservation highlighted by Alex Ferguson is very important. I want to press the amendment because I would like to see it in legislation, and so that's what I will do.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 62 be agreed to. Are we all agree? No. We are not agreed. There will be a division. Those in favour of Amendment 62, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4. Those opposed, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Therefore, there were 4 for, 5 against. Therefore, 62 is not agreed. The question is that sections 30 to 32 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are. Call Amendment 37, the name of the Minister, already debated with Amendment 21. Minister to move formally.
Formally moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 37 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. The question is that Section 33 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The question is that Sections 34 to 43 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Offences and powers of entry under fisheries legislation. I call Amendment 38, in the name of the Minister, group with Amendments 39, 41, 42, 44 and 45. Minister to move Amendment 38 and speak to all the amendments in the group.
Thank you, Convener. Convener, fishing for cockles in the Solway Firth is currently prohibited through an order made under Section 1 of the Inshore Fishing Scotland Act of 1984. The order prohibits fishing for cockles. So it is the act of fishing that enforcement officers have to gather sufficient evidence of. Doing this for an act that is rarely, if ever, witnessed by the authorities is very problematic. Health and safety considerations mean that enforcement officers cannot easily venture out onto the sands where illegal cockle fishing takes place, and I'm sure members are all aware of the tragic events in the Morecambe Bay and know the dangers therein. Amendment 38 will allow the courts to infer that illegal fishing had taken place or was just about to take place from the circumstantial evidence available. Amendment 44 makes similar provision for orders known as regulating orders made under the Sea Fisheries Shellfish Act 1967, which may become relevant should a legal fishery for cockles in the Solway Firth be opened at some point in the future. While these measures are being brought in to improve enforcement action taken against illegal cockle fishing in the Solway Firth, they will have wider application and so apply in respect of other orders made under the Inshore Fishing Scotland Act 1984, which prohibits sea fishing in specified areas, as well as regulatory orders made under the Sea Fisheries Shellfish Act 1967. This will therefore improve enforcement of other measures in inshore waters around Scotland. Amendments 39 and 45 are laid to complement existing enforcement powers in respect of illegal fishing under the Inshore Fishing Scotland Act 1984 and the Sea Fisheries Shellfish Act 1967. I have introduced these as part of a package of measures we are taking to tackle the issue of illegal fishing on the Solway Firth. Points of access to the foreshore along the coastline of the Solway Firth are limited. Points of vehicular access to the foreshore from the public road network include private roads over private land. Intelligence gathered by Marine Scotland and their partner agencies suggests that illegal cockle pickers have used private roads or private land to access the foreshore and then on to the cockle beds. Marine Scotland's enforcement officers encountered resistance from the landowners when they tried to use the same roads to gain access to the foreshore to intercept illegal cockle pickers. This amendment will give enforcement officers a power of entry to land that will allow them to insist on access where the landowner seeks to prevent that. It will also allow officers to remove any obstacles that have been put in place in the road to block their path, and a power of arrest is conferred on police officers where the landowner willfully obstructs the enforcement officers. These powers of entry will apply to Crown land, which is relevant to the majority of foreshore around Scotland, but they will not apply to Her Majesty's private estates. It is extremely challenging for Marine Scotland and their partner agencies to gather primary evidence of illegal cockle fishing. In the past, this has often limited and precluded enforcement action, including prosecution. These amendments will allow enforcers to act where there is only circumstantial evidence of illegal fishing and will therefore result in demonstrable and visible improvements to the enforcement regime. Moving away from cockles and turning to fisheries control provisions more generally, Amendments 41 and 42 concern Section 31 of the Fisheries Act 1981, which creates offences and confers inspection powers for effective enforcement of EU obligations relating to sea fishing where an order has not been made under Section 32 of the 1981 Act. At present, the scope of Section 31 is limited to the activities of fishing vessels. This amendment will increase the scope of the Act to cover shore-based activities of sellers, buyers and transporters of fisheries products in the absence of an order being placed. It will also mirror provisions which are already in place for England and Wales. I move Amendment 38.
Thank you. Alec Ferguson wishes to speak.
I simply want to speak for once in praise of the Minister for bringing forward these amendments. As he is well aware, they are the product of much lobbying and much exercised over the last 2 years and further back than that, where illegal poaching along the Solway has been an enormous problem, and for many of the reasons that he's mentioned, on many occasions the poachers' gangs have been able to cock a snook at authority and simply walk off with their ill-gotten gains to all intents and purposes. So I very, very much welcome these measures that have been taken. They already have, I believe, had some effect on the policing of illegal fishing, although it obviously continues, it always will. But it's very timely as well, because I'm aware that there's an open meeting on the 3rd of April in Dumfries to try to come to an agreement on a model of fishery to be opened later this year. That is as welcome as are these measures, and I commend the government for bringing them forward. I'm so pleased with them, I'm not even going to question the other 2 amendments in the group, which I haven't really paid much attention.
Claudia Beamish.
Thank you, Convener. I'd like to identify myself with the remarks of the Minister and also of Alex Ferguson in relation to making the legislation more robust to enable the police to hopefully do their job, enable them to do their job more effectively in stopping this really quite dreadful illegal trade and the threat that it poses to people out on the very dangerous Solway Firth as well. I would just like to seek clarification about the position on, sorry, did you say, Minister, the Crown Estates, and that there couldn't be entry onto that land, and just what the reason for that is? Or
in relation to the latter point, in terms of the Crown land, most of the foreshore, as members probably aware, is sort of Crown Estate Commission land. That will be covered by the provisions.
I'm sorry,
however, we're making an exemption in the case of Her Majesty's own properties for security reasons, etc. So,
sorry, could I just ask the reason for that, if it could be clarified? I didn't ask the question appropriately, sorry.
Well, I think it's probably in relation to security matters, but we can give clarity to the committee on that point if that would be of assistance.
And Jim Hume.
Thank you very much, Convener. And I suppose we should note that every single member that's talked here is a member for that Solway area, 3 South of Scotland MSPs and Galloway MSP. We're all very aware of the huge problems that have been down there. We're supportive of what the Minister's doing. Circumstantial evidence, I presume we'll keep an eye on that to make sure that of course, these new powers aren't abused. I'm sure they won't be, but I shall be supporting the Minister in his endeavours to tackle the illegal cockling.
Thank you. Minister, to wind up.
Thank you, Convener. I just strongly welcome the support from members of the committee. Indeed, I had myself as a member for the South of Scotland as well, to list of South of Scotland members that have spoken. I do think it's an important measure, and I certainly welcome the support of the committee for it.
Thank you very much. The question is that Amendment 38 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are agreed. Call Amendment 39 in the name of the Minister. Already debated with Amendment 38. Minister, to move formally.
Formally moved.
Thank you. The long amendment. The question is that Amendment 39 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Schedule 2, call Amendment 40 in the name of the Minister, already debated with Amendment 21. Minister, to move formally.
Formally moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 40 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are agreed. The question is that Schedule 2 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
Call Amendment 41 in the name of the Minister, already debated with Amendment 38. Minister, to move formally.
Formally moved, Convener.
Thank you. Therefore, the question is that Amendment 41 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are agreed. Call Amendment 42 in the name of the Minister. Already debated with Amendment 38. Minister, to move formally.
Formally moved.
The question is that Amendment 42 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are. The question is that Section 44 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
The question is that Section 45 and 46 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We call in Section 47 technical and procedural issues. Amendment 43 in the name of the Minister, grouped with Amendments 46, 47 and 48. Minister, to move 43 and speak to all the amendments in the group.
Thank you, Convener. Convener, these amendments are technical and procedural in nature. Amendment 43 is a minor drafting amendment that seeks to alter the way in which Section 9 of the Water, Environment and Water Services Scotland Act of 2003 is amended by the Bill. This amendment would make a clearer distinction between SEPA's objective setting for shellfish water protected areas and objective setting for water bodies generally. It would do so simply by referring to those duties in separate sub-paragraphs. It is anticipated that separate regulations will be brought forward under Section 9 of the 2003 Act, dealing with, on the one hand, objective setting for shellfish water protected areas, and on the other, objective setting for water bodies more generally. This minor technical amendment would facilitate the drafting of separate regulations, but the legal effect of the amendment made by Section 47(4) of the Bill would be unchanged. I'm happy to bring forward Amendment 46 and Amendments 47 to 48, which are consequential. These amendments will ensure that any regulations in relation to the new powers to impose charging in connection with fisheries functions will be subject to the affirmative procedure. I've listened carefully to stakeholder concerns on this issue and the comments from both this committee and the Scottish Legal Commission and Scottish Law Commission, and believe that this is an appropriate way forward. I invite the committee to accept amendments 43, 46, 47 and 48, and I move Amendment 43.
Thank you. No other member wish to speak. Don't need to wind up, I think, then. The question is that Amendment 43 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are agreed. The question is that Section 47 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are. Section 48 be agreed to.
Yes.
Are we all agreed? Yes. Good. After Section 48, call Amendment 44 in the name of the Minister, already debated with Amendment 38. Minister, to move formally.
Formally moved, Convener.
In that case, we call Amendment 44. Should it to be agreed to?
Yes.
Are we all agreed? We're all agreed. Thank you. Call Amendment 45 in the name of the Minister, already debated with Amendment 38. Minister, to move formally.
Formally moved.
I call Amendment 45. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. The question is that section 49 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Very good. I'm going to call a short suspension at the moment for a comfort break, and then we will proceed with section 50. Section 50, power to charge in the connection with the fisheries functions. I call Amendment 78 in the name of Tavish Scott. Group with Amendments 79, 80, 81, 91, 82, 83, 84, 85, 86, 87, 92 and 88. Tavish Scott to move Amendment 78 and speak to all the amendments in the group.
Convener, firstly, my apologies for making you read that great long list. And had I in the chamber desk been able to find one amendment that would have done all of this, believe me, we would have so done. But in moving 78, I really want to talk about the ability of the government to charge for not functions but for services that they will now have to undertake because of the sweeping powers that this bill is giving to them. It's important to reflect that Marine Scotland, that is the government's principal agency in respect of fish farming, has three functions: enforcement and regulation, scientific research and policy. And these are distinct without a shadow of a doubt. And when a charging regime is proposed, these need to be separate. Otherwise, there is a self-evident conflict of interest, and that's the purpose for moving these amendments. If I take one industry example, there can be, and possibly will be now, because of the powers taken under this bill, additional site visits, requests for information, and active day-to-day management scrutiny by Marine Scotland of the functions, commercial functions of a fish farm. And all those could potentially now be charged for. And what I'm seeking to do with these amendments, and that's why I've been, why they're tabled in this way, is to separate that out. The government have resisted my amendments last week and indeed today, which would have had the ability to restrict in some way, not completely I've no doubt, but in some way, the involvement that will now undoubtedly happen of Marine Scotland and government in the day-to-day management decisions of commercial operations. I think that's a mistake. I think they'll rue the day they took all these powers, but they are assuredly shortly to be on the statute book. And a commercial industry operating in a highly intensive, competitive international market with a high growth target agreed by the government will now have additional bureaucratic and cost hurdles. And what I'm doing in these amendments is to have those costs detailed in respect of the charges that will now be detailed for services that Marine Scotland provide. And that is why it is important to reflect those charges, the purpose behind those charges, which part of Marine Scotland will charge for those particular services, and why that charge is being levied. And these amendments go some way, again, in the same principle that I've followed through all the amendments I've moved over the last 2 days of committee hearings on this matter, to achieve a degree of necessary transparency about how the Government of Marine Scotland will operate and intervene in commercial decisions. These amendments also assist, Convener, in ensuring there is transparency over the statutory functions of, for example, the Fish Health Inspectorate, and those charges that may be levied without statute or regulatory underpinning by the powers that government are taking. I also hope the government need to and want to recognise that the industry can buy specialist knowledge and services from third-party contractors, including those who operate in international marketplaces. So where such a service is more cost-effectively procured by the industry, I don't believe that it should be forced upon the industry that only Marine Scotland should provide that particular service. And yet that is the manner in which the bill is currently drafted. In short, I believe that Marine Scotland have an important role in ensuring that their charging is transparent, that their charging relates to the service, not the function, but to the service they are providing, and that there should be opportunities where appropriate for that service to be provided by bodies that are simply not part of the government, for all the reasons of conflict that I think are being taken and are now inherent in the passing of this legislation. And I hope that in moving these amendments in that spirit, Convener, I simply commend to the committee, to members, the principle that where a charge is being now imposed upon an industry, a commercial industry, at the very least, that industry should expect that charge to be very, very detailed and very, very clear. And that is the purpose of moving 78.
Are there any other members who wish to speak? Alec Ferguson.
Thank you, Convener. Very briefly, I'm largely supportive of all of these amendments, but I wonder if I could ask Tavish Scott, in reference to number 86, whether he could clarify why he believes that such a degree of specificity, if that is the right word, is so important. I have slight concerns over that because I don't see an awful lot wrong with the current wording, and I just wondered if you could expand on that before we come to the Minister's response.
Okay.
Sorry, in summing up.
In summing up, yes, indeed. Minister, to respond.
Thank you, Convener. There are obviously a number of common themes within the amendments lodged by Tavish Scott, and I do recognise the passion which he's putting forward the case on behalf of the industry today. Amendments 78 to 81, 83 to 85 and 87 to 88 look to replace the principle of charges in connection with the carrying out of fishery functions with that of charging for carrying out of fishery services. Although I'm not altogether clear, or at least I wasn't until today, as to which definition of a service was being applied here, I do struggle to understand the arguments for why such an approach would be preferable. As far as I'm aware, only one stakeholder has expressed a similar view to that expressed by Tavish Scott today, and that was based on concerns about the principle of the Scottish Government charging for its own core functions or for services which were already provided by preferred commercial suppliers, a point that Tavish Scott picked up on. That is clearly not the case in our view. As I explained during stage one, the primary purpose of these provisions is to promote the effective use of resources. Any charges payable under regulations made using this power may only require a person to pay a charge if and insofar as the person is someone in relation to whom a fisheries function has been carried out. In addition, the charge may not exceed the reasonable cost incurred in the carrying out of the function. The charge therefore must relate to the function in respect to which it is charged and may not generate a surplus. Amendment 91 and 82 look to shape how any future charging regulations might look. Amendment 82, though, is unnecessary since subsection 1 of section 50 already requires the regulations to specify the particular fisheries functions in relation to which they apply. Amendment 91 also seems, if no disrespect, to be confused as to whether it's for or against charges for functions rather than for services. I have already made it clear that it is the Scottish Government's intention to consult fully before any regulations made under this power are brought forward, but I have heard today a number of occasions the concerns that Alex Ferguson and Tavish Scott have made about secondary legislation, and I do take that on board. However, we do commit to bringing forward consultation. This commitment has been placed on the face of the bill, and the earlier amendment, which will require any regulations made to be subject to affirmative procedure, would suggest to me that the details should be left for that process. Amendment 86 also looks to define those who we should consult with. The bill makes clear that before making regulations, Scottish ministers must consult such persons as they consider appropriate. There are already well-established administrative procedures for consultations, and I see no reason why we shouldn't continue in that fashion in the future. In some respects, had a similar approach been taken with some of these amendments, we might not be discussing them today. Finally, Amendment 92 seeks to place a requirement on ministers to prepare and publish a report on the operation of the regulation within a specific time period. While I fully accept that it is desirable that the operation of any regulations made using this power should be reviewed on a regular basis, I think the timescale should be determined as part of the wider policy development. On that basis, I think it would be wrong to determine that period now. I invite the committee to resist amendments 78, 79, 80, 81, 91, 82, 83, 84, 85, 86, 87, 92 and 88. Sorry.
Thank you. Tavish Scott, to wind up, press or withdraw.
Thank you, Convener. Mr Ferguson makes a reasonable point on 86, and it's a balanced argument. It's a judgment call as to whether that amendment adds or subtracts or does nothing in respect of that, and I'm more than happy to reflect on that point as to whether that amendment does add anything. On the Minister's arguments, I can't both be making this case on behalf of the industry and then there only be one stakeholder who's responded to it. So that doesn't seem to me a consistent argument, and the Minister's constantly said that during this debate. Let me be clear, this industry matters to my part of the world, it matters to Scotland, and it matters to the government, because every time Mr Salmond or Mr Lockhead are rightly overseas making the case for the buying and the purchasing of Scottish food, they make a big thing about salmon, and they're right to do so. I applaud that activity. But you can't on one hand trot around the world saying buy Scottish salmon, on the other hand impose a heck of a lot of costs and extra bureaucratic hurdles on it, and that is what this bill is doing. And I therefore have grave reservations about the sweeping powers that ministers are taking and the government's taking for the future. the ministers and governments, and I don't mean Mr Wheelhouse personally, I mean ministers and governments plural, always say that it's best to leave the detail to subsequent secondary legislation, and with all the internal problems that go with that. And therefore, the purpose of my amendments was to achieve a degree of clarity on the face of the bill in relation to, I think, really important charges and areas of government and Marine Scotland activity, which otherwise will frankly not be scrutinised very closely. I'm sure that the convener and this committee see these bodies maybe on a reasonably regular basis, but that is very different from it and those aspects of their activities being laid down in statute. And I think it leaves the minister, not again this minister personally, but ministers and ministers in the future, open to a vast amount of parliamentary activity in respect of the functions they are taking on here, if they don't at least have some of these aspects laid down formally in statute, and allow therefore the formal process of primary legislation to achieve the clarity in the bill, which certainly the industry wants, but I suspect an awful lot of stakeholders do as well, because the precedent that's being taken here I think is very considerable indeed. And I would urge, therefore, the committee to give some consideration to the amendments I've moved in this area.
Thank you very much. And are you going to press the Amendment 78? Okay, the question is that Amendment 78 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are not agreed. There will be a division. All members in favour of Amendment 78, please show. 1, 2. Those opposed, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There were 2 for, 7 against. That amendment is not agreed. Call Amendment 79 in the name of Tavish Scott, ready debated with Amendment 78. Tavish Scott to move or not move.
Convener, I'll spare the committee voting through all these because there's no point. Having moved 78 and having to vote on that, I'm not going to move the rest of these in this group.
Okay, if that's the case, then the committee has agreed that is 79, 80, 81, 91, 82, 83, 84, 85, 86, 87, 92 and 88. I thank Tavish for withdrawing these, which helps us enormously, but has not impeded the debate that's essential, and I thank him for that. So therefore the question is that section 50 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. We move to section 51, and this is Group 16, a report on fixed penalty notices, and I call Tavish Scott to speak to this amendment.
Convener, many thanks. The purpose of this amendment is to ensure that government publish on a period which I appreciate could be discussed. I suggest 3 months, but I recognise that there would be different views on that. They publish a record of how many fixed penalty notices are issued, and thereafter the consequences of those fixed penalty notices. I think that's important from a number of perspectives, not least of which this again is taking a new power in respect of a commercial industry. All this activity used to be handled through the Sheriff Court. I have some pretty grave concerns about, and indeed I think a number of us may have, some pretty grave concerns as to how that was done in the past. I don't believe the regulatory authorities did either the industry any favours or indeed anyone else who is a stakeholder in this industry any favours by failing in some circumstances to make appropriate prosecutions when that would have clearly been the right thing to do. And I appreciate therefore the government is seeking to find a different way to do this. I'm not personally convinced it's the right one, but quite frankly on the basis of what's gone before, there's not much point in worrying about one's personal view. So I therefore simply want to suggest that this at least means there is again some transparency around what is going to take place after this bill is passed, and that the reporting period, in other words, the time when such notices are publicly intimated, I appreciate could be open to a different period, and I would so move on that basis.
Thank you. Any other members wish to speak? The Minister to respond.
Thank you, Convener. I will invite Tavish Scott to withdraw Amendment 64 for the reasons I'll go on to explain. If Mr Scott, however, is not persuaded, then I would urge the committee to resist Amendment 64 moved by Tavish Scott. I have no difficulty with the publication of statistical data in principle, and I do support the principles under which Tavish Scott has moved his amendment. However, the reporting interval of 3 months envisaged under the amendment lacks flexibility and moreover is inconsistent with the treatment of statistical data on fixed penalty notices in other regulatory regimes. Fixed penalty notices form part of wider criminal justice disposals, and there are existing examples of statistical data regarding, for example, certain road traffic offences and fiscal fines, which are published as part of the Scottish Government's statistical bulletins on an annual basis. Much of the existing statistical data is published on a voluntary basis, and there are not many examples of statutory requirements to publish statistical data relating to the criminal justice system. Section 306 of the Criminal Procedure Scotland Act 1995 is one such example, but the requirement is to, in that particular example, the requirement is to publish certain relevant information in each year. I believe that the publication of statistical data here in relation to fixed penalty notices should be treated no differently to these, and to do otherwise by setting a quarterly statutory interval for publication rather than an annual target may set an unhelpful precedent which could go beyond the current bill. I've already given a commitment to publish statistics on fixed penalty notices as part of the Scottish Government's response to the committee's report on the bill at stage 1. On that basis, the general thrust of Mr Scott's proposal will be delivered without the need to put the requirement on a statutory footing. As I said, I am more than happy to restate our commitment to publish statistical data on the use of fixed penalty notices, but unless Mr Scott is persuaded to withdraw his amendment, then I urge the committee to resist the amendment tabled by Mr Scott today.
Tavish Scott, to wind up, press or withdraw.
Thank you, Convener. I think those are reasonable arguments, although the argument that this would set a precedent for something that may go further in other areas is never one that wins it with me, personally. I think that's kind of our job as parliamentarians, to push on that kind of point. Governments can always make the argument that we don't want such precedents set. But rather more seriously, the main points that Mr Wheelhouse makes, I think, are entirely fair. The only thing I would ask for the record is that by the time we get to stage 3 on this bill, that issue has been discussed with those that may be affected by it, and that in those circumstances were that to be necessarily absolutely agreed, but broadly agreed, then I'm more than happy to withdraw this amendment.
Thank you, Mr Scott. The member wishes to withdraw the amendment with the agreement of the committee. Does any member object to the amendment being withdrawn? No member has objected, so therefore Amendment 64 is withdrawn. Move on to Amendment 51, which is Section 51, which are we all agreed? Section 52, call Amendment 46, the name of the Minister, already debated with Amendment 43. Minister to move formally.
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 46 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Call Amendment 47 in the name of the Minister, already debated with Amendment 43. Minister to move formally.
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 47 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Call Amendment 48 in the name of the Minister, already debated with Amendment 43. Minister to move formally.
Formally moved, Convener.
The question is that Amendment 48 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are. The question is that Section 52 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
The question is that Sections 53 to 57 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
The question is that the long title be agreed to. Are we all agreed? That ends Stage 2 consideration of the Aquaculture-Fisheries-Scotland Bill. Members should note that the bill will now be reprinted as amended and will be available in print on the web tomorrow morning. The Parliament has not yet determined when Stage 3 will take place, but members can now lodge Stage 3 amendments at any time with the legislation team. Members will be informed of the deadline for amendments once that has been determined. I would like to thank the Minister and his officials for their contribution, and to members of the committee for their detailed scrutiny, which is most welcome. I close the meeting at this point.